Welcome back. In August of 1988, hockey has changed forever. Hockey in California gets a huge boost. Hockey in Edmonton suddenly, perilous isn't the right term, but it definitely looks like things in Edmonton are kind of falling apart. The first sign of this was Paul Coffey wanted out. Very publicly wanted out, and you start hearing about how the Edmonton Oilers don't really want to spend the big money, and maybe they can't spend the big money. And the Wayne Gretzky trade is really about money as much as anything else. It doesn't end up being a horrible hockey trade when you look at the parts involved, although Jimmy Carson, who'd had a great year before the trade and a pretty good year after the trade as well, he's not able to sustain that. So Jimmy Carson comes to the Edmonton Oilers from LA, having played 80 games that previous season, 55 goals, 52 assists, 107 points. So a young center. And trading Gretzky, you want a center back. They also get Marty Gelinas, who had just been drafted 7th overall by the LA Kings. So he gets drafted by the Kings and traded to the Oilers. And the Oilers also get 1989, 1991, and 1993 first-round draft picks. None of them end up being big star players, so it's 3 first-round draft picks. It looks dramatic, but in the end, none of those players end up being needle movers. And $50 million US in cash. And it's that cash that really paints Pocklington in a bad light. Peter Pocklington, not a popular owner amongst Edmonton fans, and I mean, that's kind of an understatement, isn't it? So Pocklington's burned an effigy after the trade, and I remember seeing that on the news. And even Canada's House of Commons was arguing about whether or not they could, do anything about Gretzky going south of the border. Gretzky was the league as far as superstars went. You had Gretzky. Lemieux was there, but Lemieux didn't have that draw that Gretzky did. I have no idea why, but Lemieux never quite had that same gravitas that Gretzky did. Maybe it was all the cups in the 80s for Gretzky, just put him on that next level, playing in the Canadian market as well, I would think. Janet Jones gets blamed a lot. To this day, Oiler fans will tell you it was all Janet Jones, or it was all Pocklington, or it's 50-50. Janet Jones, an actress who apparently didn't want to live in Edmonton, at least that's Pocklington's storyline with this, as to part of the reason why the trade gets made. But if you hear Gretzky talk about it, it was between Detroit and LA, and he opted to go to LA, which ends up being huge. If he'd gone to Detroit, it would have been huge for the Wings, but it wouldn't have transformed hockey in the southern U.S. the way that the Gretzky trade did when he went to LA. So Janet Jones gets dubbed as hockey's Yoko Ono, which I know is a dated reference now, but it's basically that Yoko broke up the Beatles, which she didn't. But again, I understand why people feel that way. John Lennon gets his new weird girlfriend and starts doing all this weird music, and suddenly, out you go. And then the band all breaks up. So the Kings get Gretzky, 64 games, 40 goals, 109 assists, 149 points in his last year in Edmonton, which nobody knew was his last year in Edmonton at the time. In the press and among fans that I saw, apparently in the hockey world it was known that Peter Pocklington was trying to move Gretzky, but they kept it under wraps really well. Marty McSorley goes to the Kings as well. 60 games, 9 goals, 17 assists, 26 points with the Oilers that year before. And Mike Krushelnyski, kind of a forgotten part of the trade, but I liked Krushelnyski. 76 games, 20 goals, 27 assists, 47 points. Pretty good middle six forward there. And so I think as a hockey trade, I think the Kings get the much better of the deal. Again, Carson, 100-plus point player, but he doesn't stay at that level, ends up going to Detroit. He didn't stay with the Oilers either. And this is where the Oilers storyline really starts to change. They had been a dominant dynasty in the National Hockey League, winning 4 Stanley Cups in 5 seasons. But when Gretzky left, that's the second star player that had left. Paul Coffey was the first one to have a messy public divorce with Edmonton. Wasn't a messy public divorce with Gretzky, though he cried at the press conference, and clearly this was upsetting to him. So while there were a lot of people that didn't like Wayne after, he just went down to LA and searching for this and that, I think he would have been fine staying in Edmonton. And I never actually saw for sure that Janet Jones wouldn't have been willing to live in Edmonton, but I mean, seriously. Anyways, it is just one of those things, though. But what happens, too, is that we see a change in fortunes for both franchises. The LA Kings had been basically stomped on for years, but they gained 23 points their first year with Gretzky, whereas the Oilers drop 15 points, and it puts LA ahead of Edmonton in the overall standings. Then they meet each other in the first round of the playoffs in 1989, and Wayne Gretzky, in what's a thrilling 7-game series, knocks out the Edmonton Oilers in that first round. Now, the Kings get knocked out in the second round by Calgary, but what this does is it really brings in a lot of new interest for the LA Kings, a team that, and I've done the historical videos on it now, I've talked a lot about attendance. Attendance had never been that great in LA, but that definitely helped. Suddenly, the Stars that were going to watch the Lakers, well, now they're watching the Kings too. And when you get the Stars there and you're getting on the news with, hey, look where Jack Nicholson is, look where all these people are. And of course, still to this day, Snoop Dogg's going to be there a lot of the time. Will Ferrell's always there. And it works. The whole superstar thing in LA works. And it starts with Wayne Gretzky. So the teams are going in opposite directions. Now, the Oilers do win the 1990 Stanley Cup. Part of that felt like it was a sort of a last hurrah just to prove they could win without Gretzky. It felt like that was really, really important to guys like Messier and Lowe, that they could show, hey, we can win a Stanley Cup without Wayne. But for the Oilers, they're definitely seeing that dynasty falling apart. Now, May 13th of 1989, and this doesn't feel like it's a major thing at the time, but looking back, it kind of was. Wayne Gretzky hosts Saturday Night Live, and he's not a great actor. I'm not going to lie. He's not a great actor. I know that may surprise some people, but yeah, not a great actor. But what it shows is it shows that hockey has reached that next level, where you have a superstar hockey player hosting Saturday Night Live, which was a big deal in the late 80s, early 90s. And so it shows how hockey is really, expanding in terms of interest in the States. Then you get the San Jose Sharks in 91, and you get the Mighty Ducks movie in 1992, followed by Anaheim getting the Mighty Ducks hockey team in 1993. Not a coincidence this is all shortly after Wayne Gretzky's traded to the LA Kings. Not a surprise, not really. And then Arizona getting a team as well. I think in part because there's more interest in the South now, and the NHL trying to capitalize on that. Now, 1993, the Kings would get to the Stanley Cup final. This is as close to getting a Stanley Cup as Wayne Gretzky would get the rest of his career. Of course, it's a Stanley Cup final that Leaf fans and Leaf players probably don't think should have happened. That conference final, there was a lot of controversy there. But at any rate, the Kings do get to that final. Now, one thing that the Kings did that was smart, and Bruce McNall made some good decisions, and bringing in Gretzky was definitely one of them. But the rebrand to this happened that same summer, worked so well. A well-timed rebrand will sell you a whole ton of merch. And in this case, not only is it well-timed, and it's probably a cleaner look, but they changed to the Raiders colors. Well, who sells better than the Raiders in the NFL in the late 80s? Nobody. So the Kings are kind of, jumping on the bandwagon a little bit, but then everybody's buying Kings jerseys, right? And it's a way to kind of cross-market yourself with the Raiders, who were in LA at the time. They were not in Oakland at that time, or Las Vegas, obviously. But that rebrand worked. Now, what's interesting is the rebrand works, but they only kept this logo and this look for 10 seasons. And then they would switch to that shield and the purple, and that's the look that I like the most from them. But one thing that's interesting with the Gretzky move is he goes to LA. They become a much better team. They win that trade going away. They make a ton of money off of Wayne Gretzky's likeness and off of just his presence on the team. It buoys them in the regular season. Suddenly they're making the playoffs and they're selling out the arena. But it changes the National Hockey League's presentation. And I really think that the huge expansion we see in the 90s right into the year 2000, I don't know if we see that. Maybe not quite as robust if Gretzky stays in Edmonton. So if Gretzky played his whole career in Edmonton, which would have been great if he had, I don't think we see that huge influx of fans for the LA Kings. We probably don't get the other California teams. Maybe we don't get the Phoenix Coyotes. Maybe there's a team in Houston a little bit sooner. Could have really changed everything. But for the NHL, it was a move that worked out really, really well because it generated a ton of cash. It meant that Gretzky was in a market that desperately needed that megastar. And it's kind of too bad, too, that Marcel Dionne never had that same level of respect. But the Kings weren't a team that won Stanley Cups then. And they had the Triple Crown line, which was great. but Gretzky just had that superstar aura about him. And there are very, very few in the National Hockey League that have ever had exactly the kind of aura that Gretzky had as a player. And so, yeah, one interesting part though is that the Kings ascension and then the '93 Stanley Cup final, it kind of fell apart quickly after that. Gretzky ends up being traded to the Blues, but the Kings never get back down to where they were prior to that Gretzky trade. They never end up in that same kind of financial distress, and there's always still some interest in the LA Kings in the Kings in that market, no matter how good or how bad they've been, which feels like it's at a higher level than it was in say the mid '80s. This was a team that had its struggles, but yeah, Gretzky plays there, and I think the Kings win this trade. And of course, Pocklington would end up having to sell the Oilers, and almost sold them to Houston, almost sold them to the Rockets owner Les Alexander. And if that had happened, you could have seen the Houston Oilers, unless the NFL would have blocked that name. Maybe they would have had to change the name from Oilers, but it almost happened. That was during the mid '90s, where hockey in Canada was seen as being potentially on its last legs. Calgary was seen as potentially being on its way out. Edmonton being potentially on its way out. Of course, you lose Quebec, you lose Winnipeg. And there were even rumors that maybe Vancouver wasn't as stable as you might want. There was discussion about how Montreal and Toronto could have been the only surviving teams in Canada, but other Canadian teams get through that. And again, a lot of that discussion can be traced back to the 1988 trade of Wayne Gretzky, because it changed the look of it. It looked like a Canadian player couldn't get the money they wanted with a Canadian team, and if they really wanted to cash in, they go to the States. So there's that. But anyways, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you've not done so already. Did you burn Peter Pocklington in effigy? Did you decide, or do you still believe that Janet Jones is the Yoko Ono of hockey? Let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.